So first off, this charge of obsession is coming from someone who goes through years-old blog posts, finds audio clips of me from 4 years ago, and let's not forget that the anti-heretic actually started this particular exchange by talking about me in a video to Anarchy Cult, and has started previous exchanges as well. So his claim that I'm obsessed with him, like, he's making video responses to me, and he started this particular exchange, and he's fighting stuff from 4 years ago, okay? The anti-heretic also likes to chide me for having said I wouldn't make any more videos to him. Well, he's done the exact same thing. He chided me for making a video response to Lithited Man only 10 hours after the Lithited Man video. Well, he's made videos to me far shorter time spans than that. And his lies in here are just getting more stupid at this point. I said blacks and mestizos support affirmative action. He said that they didn't. And then he made a video saying that, well, the ones he worked with opposed it, and he gave reasons why. He was taking his personal experience and generalizing it, and I showed him data that showed that his personal experience were not representative of the broader population, and Mr. Never Admits He Is Wrong is just shooting more ink saying, well, I never meant that. Well, in my video, The Skeptical Heretic's Intellectual Abdication, I have the audio clip of him saying that. So, you know, all I can say is go look at what he actually said, and I think 90% of people who are looking at it in good faith are going to recognize that he's lying. Well, 100% of people looking at it in good faith are going to recognize that he's just lying. He's just trying to not admit that he said something so bald-faced wrong and stupid.
It's so addictive making videos to people like Fringe, simply because of that pleasing wet snap that you hear inside your head every time you smash up their worldview and show it to be based on bullshit and half-truths.
Like what? Evogen's definition of heritability? In a video response to me, you cited Evogen, you cited his definition of heritability. Is this one of the examples of you smashing my worldview? Okay. Or how about when you proclaimed that there didn't exist a simple correlation between brain size and IQ? There is no correlation. People like Nisbet and Flynn have arguments as to why this correlation between brain size and IQ doesn't lend much credence to the hereditarian argument, so they have arguments about it, but that's not what you did. Right? You simply said there is no correlation. You just outright denied the data, and not one of your commenters called you out on it. Is this an example of you smashing my worldview?
It's interesting to see how people's minds work when they have a preconception they start with and then work from there, as opposed to enter into something trying to actively not acknowledge any preconception and go where the evidence leads them.
Okay, so you say I'm blinded by my preconceptions. Well, I can say that you're blinded by your preconceptions. Just proclaiming one side is biased and not the other doesn't actually get you anywhere. So let's make a case, or I'm going to make a case here as for why I am less likely to be biased than you. Okay, 1, the world we live in is racial egalitarian, and that includes the descriptive argument. I have shown an ability to go against the mainstream position, which is that evolution stopped in the brain when it became politically incorrect to continue. Now, just because I managed to go against the mainstream doesn't mean I'm correct, right? Lots of people who go against the mainstream are wrong. But it's one piece of evidence in my favor. I've shown an ability to renounce a former view and take on a new view. Okay? 2, the anti-heretic has been undeniably wrong on 2 points. First is gotta find the genes, which he lies, and he's trying to say that he never held to that. And so he erected this bogus methodological distinction between estimation and calculated quantity, when an estimation is it's the stupidest thing, and I already made a video on that. And he goes on, and he went all in with the Evogen definition of heritability. Okay? And there are other points, which I also think he is wrong on, but those 2 points are the ones that aren't really muddled. Those are the 2 points that we can say with pretty close to certainty that he was wrong about, with unequivocally wrong about. Okay, and the third point to keep in mind is that social forces are in the anti-heretic's favor. I would stand to gain viewership and subscribers if I renounced evolution in regards to humans, whereas the anti-heretic would stand to lose if he took a more evolutionary approach to human populations. And he's really not going to like the way I'm wording that. No, I'm all for evolution. You're the creationist. Like, well, in this instance, the parallel is closer to you being the creationist. So I think these 3 points are reasons why I am less likely to be biased, or likely to be less biased than the anti-heretic. Doesn't necessarily mean that I am, but those are just 3 reasons why, if you had to guess, you should guess that I would be less biased.
And this is a problem I see with a lot of people on YouTube. People who are on the right side of topics, people who are on the wrong side of topics. And it's just intriguing. It's so much fun to watch these people make these crazy assertions like there's no racism problem in England.
And this is another anti-heretic lie. I was saying, relative to the United States, why does a set of countries generally considered to be less racist than the United States have more draconian hate crimes, hate speech, and affirmative action laws than the United States does? This goes against the anti-heretics' hypothesis that affirmative action, hate crime, and hate speech are a response to racism when the opposite appears to be true. These laws come into effect when there is less quote-unquote racism. I'm not denying the existence of quote-unquote racism, however he's defining it in the United Kingdom.
It's like that assertion right there. What is he trying to say? That having a lack of racists in your country means that you must have more anti-racist laws? Or is it a matter of he just doesn't understand history and linear time? Like the fact that there used to be a lot of racism, it became socially unacceptable, and to combat this socially unacceptable thing, someone began making laws in order to prevent this socially unacceptable practice from continuing.
And this makes zero sense because laws come from public opinion. Civil rights didn't pass until it had majority support. The law didn't change public opinion. The law was a reflection of public opinion, and this is generally true. The median voter tends to support the status quo and is generally opposed to budget cuts in the specific, though if you ask in the abstract, they'll say they want cuts. The anti-heretic says, I'm refusing information, when the anti-heretic provided no information at all on the racial views of people in the past, dismisses my data with hypothetical objections, and demonstrating an ignorance of what a proxy is, and then says I'm dismissing evidence when he provided none of his own. Then the anti-heretic says I'm just raging against a system in which I couldn't succeed, and then completely oversimplifies what I said about college. Right? This is, of course, a diversion, but what is the anti-heretic saying? Is he saying that the current method of sitting kids in a class in front of a teacher, giving multiple live presentations each day on a subject, is the best way to teach kids things? When you try to go out and learn things, is that what you seek out? If not, then you are for some sort of substantial reform. Maybe we should look at some data instead of just assuming the status quo. And if we looked at the data, we would see that proctored learning empirically produces better educational results in much quicker times. Okay? Maybe the anti-heretic has some psychological issues that makes him worship authority, and this authoritarian view of knowledge may be what led him to adopt Evogen's definition of heritability and say that you had to find the genes to make heritability estimates. Right? There's my psychologizing of him.
I don't understand what he's talking about. Maybe he's bought into this weird myth that since we have a black president, we live in a post-racial society.
Yeah, I've never bought into that myth. You, on the other hand, are buying into the myth that such a society is possible. Is South Africa post-racial? Is Zimbabwe post-racial? The only genuine post-racial societies I can think of off the top of my head are the United Arab Emirates and Singapore, and those countries have a very peculiar self-selection in terms of the people that come into those countries, so they're not representative of general people worldwide.
You know, you keep saying that people have taken that out of context, or they've taken other things you've said out of context.
No, we're just talking about this specific clip, this specific quote. Stop trying to muddle and blend issues.
Present the original context, because I remember the original. It's not on YouTube now, because you and your buddies flagged the shit out of it every time it showed up.
Yeah, unless you're watching my videos from 2008, you do not have the original context. So this is, in all likelihood, another lie.
But that was you going forward in your argument in which you were trying to dance around saying blacks are inferior.
Alright, this is a great little kangaroo court thing we got going on here. I don't have the video. The video was from 4 years ago, but the burden of proof is now on me. Moreover, when have I ever said anything like that anywhere else? You know, why don't you find another example of me saying something like that? So what you have is one clip. You can't produce the original file. You can't find me saying something like that anywhere else, but you're just going to assume that that's an accurate representation of what I said until I produce the original file? Aren't you supposed to be skeptical? Where's the skepticism, Mr. Skeptical Heretic? As for the charge of flagging, okay, evidence, please. If not, that's two charges for which you have no evidence. In before you demand that I prove that I'm not flagging. On the other hand, I've been locked out of this account. I've had multiple accounts banned on various websites. Obviously not on YouTube, because the terms of service say on YouTube that you're not allowed to have a new account after you've been banned, so obviously I wouldn't violate that. Libertarian Realist has had his accounts banned, on other websites, of course. How many accounts have you had banned? Right? How many times have you been locked out? Right? I think the opposite of what you're saying is true. We have more evidence to assume, not necessarily you, but that people like you are flagging people like us, and not the inverse.
Because that's what you do. You dance around that topic, Fringe, constantly. And it's sad, and it's very transparent. And when people call you out on it, when you get really close to saying something stupid, you say, well, I never said that, I never meant it. It sounds like Bill O'Reilly.
Oh, I do this regularly? Well, why not provide another example of another instance of this? You seem to have no problem with mining through my old blog post and through my old video posts of finding apparent contradictions, and you have no problem of presenting it, so why wouldn't you do it here?
Of course, just like Bill O'Reilly, there's video of you doing dumb shit like saying, I'm a white nationalist. Well, how many white nationalists do you know who aren't racists?
What does this have to do with the veracity of the clip you played? You're shifting focus here.
That's right, Fringe. You don't get to do that. Because to properly explain the genetic causation of a particular phenotypical trait, you have to be able to identify the gene, you have to be able to identify what it does, you have to be able to identify different things that impact the function of that gene, things that repress it, things that express it.
Okay, for bottom-up estimates you do, but not for top-down estimates. The anti-heretic is just muddying the waters again. I was simply saying that bottom-up and top-down heritability estimates have to control for environmental factors, right? Just because you're doing a bottom-up heritability estimate, you're finding specific genetic structures and relations to infer heritability, right? You're still doing estimates, you're still making inferences, and you still have to control for the environment that people live in, okay? One advantage top-down estimates have right now is that post-birth epigenetic effects are already taken into account. Post-birth epigenetic effects are expressed as the environmentality of a trait.
This is what you need to do. This is what modern medicine, in terms of genetics, does. They see if you have a marker, they tell you what the risk factors are for it, and they give you an approximate percentage chance of whether that phenotype will manifest in your later life.
Well, at least you seem to finally understand the principle of gene amplification. That is, your genes become more and more expressed with age. The racial IQ gaps also widen with age, and IQ becomes more heritable with age. While not conclusive, it is evidence in favor of the high heritability of IQ. And you seem to not really understand the principle of gene amplification when I put it in those terms, as that it was another piece of evidence for the hereditarian theory. But now you appear to understand the principle of gene amplification, so good on you. But a trait like height, what you're talking about here, or IQ, this doesn't work the way you describe, Mr. Anti-Heretic, and heritability estimates don't work that way. And this includes both bottom-up and top-down estimates, because of the highly polygenic nature of IQ and of the highly polygenic nature of height, you can't say that if someone has the height gene or something, because there's something like 10,000 height genes. Similarly, there are something like 10,000 IQ genes, and they all interact. What you're saying only makes sense for a trait that is monogenic or influenced by only a small number of genes. Okay, in that case, the problem is simple enough that you can just find the genes and then make risk factor estimates based on their lifestyle and stuff. But things like height and IQ, you can't do that with, because there's too many genes, right? And there's interactions between all those genes. What you're saying only makes sense for traits influenced by a small number of genes, right? You don't know what you're talking about.
And we don't really know enough to give you that answer with 100% accuracy. But it's coming. It takes time. This is why I've said I'm not an egalitarian or environmentalist, which is the actual term for people who ascribe to a greater environment than genetics function.
That's right, folks. He still doesn't know what heritability means. No, there is no such thing as genetics having a greater or lesser function than environments do, you clod. Organisms are genes expressed in an environment. To what extent their traits come from their environment or their genetics is a meaningless question that has no answer, okay? An organism is genes expressed in an environment. What we can do is look at a population or between two populations and estimate what proportion of the variance in a trait in question is attributable to difference in environment, and what proportion of the variance of the trait in question is attributable to variance in genetics. Okay? That's what heritability means. What proportion of the observed variance in a trait in question is attributable to variance in genetics. All right? Even after EvoGen Gate, you still don't know what heritability means.